All right, today we're going to talk about a really powerful idea called microstorying. The whole theory is that maybe, just maybe, the key to solving our biggest, most complicated problems is to start paying attention to the smallest stories. Let's dive right in.
It really feels like our world is more divided than ever, right? We're surrounded by these huge clashing narratives that seem to pull us apart. But what if we've been looking for solutions in all the wrong places? This is the big question we're exploring. Could the answer be not in some grand new story, but in the little ones we overlook every day?
So, to really get why this matters, we first have to unpack the problem itself. And, well, the problem is all about the big stories that seem to run everything. Okay, so look at this. On one side, you've got what we call grand narratives. Think of these as the official histories, right? The big, clean, linear stories you learn in school, usually about great men and major events. But then, on the other side, you have Microstoria. And that's the total opposite. It's messy, it's local, it's all about the fragmented, real-life stories of everyday people. And here's the thing. Those big, grand narratives, they almost always leave out what it actually feels like to live through something. All right, so if the big stories are the issue, then how do we actually start tuning into the little ones? Let's break down a couple of the key ideas here. Microstoria, at its core, is just life. It's the little stories we're all living every single day, It's that conversation you hear in line for coffee, or the real story of a local business owner just trying to stay afloat. These are the stories that make up the real fabric of a community, but they get totally steamrolled by those big official narratives. And this leads to another really cool idea, the anti-narrative. Think of it like this. It's the raw dough before it's baked into a loaf of bread. It's all the messy bits and pieces of a story. The feelings, the fragments, the little moments before someone cleans it up and forces it into a nice, neat beginning, middle, and end. This is where the real stuff is, the authentic stuff. And I love this quote from David Boje, who's really the pioneer of this whole thing. He says, Microstorying, notice the ing, is not a static noun, but a verb of action dynamics. Basically, it's not something you just read about. It's something you do. It's an action. It's about actively listening and gathering and connecting all those little story fragments. Okay, so it's a verb, an action. Great. But what does that look like in practice? How do we actually turn this into a strategy that can make a real difference? Well, here's the basic 4-step game plan. First, you start with story listening, and that just means creating a space where people feel safe enough to actually share. Second, you do what's called anti-narrative mapping. Basically, you gather up all those raw, fragmented story bits we were just talking about. Then comes step 3, restoring. This is where everyone starts working together, looking at all those pieces and finding the connections, the shared meaning. And that leads to the final step, quantum storytelling, which sounds complicated, but it's really just this beautiful idea that all of our stories, past, present, and even our imagined futures, are all tangled up together. And that's where the healing starts, when you finally see how your own little thread is part of a much bigger tapestry. So that's the theory. But does this stuff actually work out in the real world? Let's look at a really powerful example of what this looks like on the ground. Okay, so I want you to imagine a city, and this city is just torn apart. It's been fractured by a series of immigration raids. There's fear, there's mistrust, and the only story you ever hear is one of us versus them. Now, into this incredibly tense situation, someone decides to create a story circle. And just look at the guest list. You've got families who are directly affected by the raids sitting in the same room as former ICE employees. You've got community activists, local shop owners. These are people you would never imagine talking to each other, let alone sharing their personal experiences. So the question is, what happens? What happens when you put all those conflicting, deeply personal us versus them stories in the same room and just listen? Well, something pretty amazing happens. As they listen to each other, really listen, these shared emotional threads start to pop up. Things like fear, a desire for safety, even moral conflict. Suddenly, that huge us versus them story starts to crumble. And in its place, a new, more complex story begins to get woven together from all these small personal truths. The community literally starts to reweave itself from the bottom up. So you see, this is way more than just a neat little communication trick. At its heart, this is an approach that's all about ethics, about healing, and about trying to build a better society. So what's the ultimate goal here? Well, it's about a few really important things. It's about giving dignity back to voices that have been pushed to the side. It's about fighting back against those big, dehumanizing stories that drive us apart.
And at the end of the day, it's about using our own stories to build a more coherent and healthier community for everyone.
So look, if there's one thing you walk away with today, let it be this. Real change, lasting change, it doesn't always come from some huge top-down master plan. So often, real healing starts with something much smaller. It starts by just paying attention, by actually listening to the small, vital stories we usually walk right past.
And that really leaves us with one final question. For you, think about your own community, your own neighborhood. What are the unheard stories right there in your own backyard? And what might change if we all just started to listen?